Okay. Let me get the audio on. All right. Going outside so you can see my trees.
Welcome to Viral Transmissions. Sunday, May the 3rd. Starting with the healthcare cheer. I think. Woo! I don't hear Joe. I don't hear Joe's feed. We've lost Joe. We've lost the co-host. How are you, Joe? Folks in the chat.
I'm definitely hearing it out the window at my place.
Yeah. I mean, I'm hearing on my local cheering, but you can hear Joe fine. Okay, great. So somehow, all right, we've got some sort of strange issue getting all of us audio linked on the same feed. It's going to be an interesting night, folks.
My neighbor's kids love the cheer. All right. I feel like that's most of it. Now I'll try to guide you through my disgusting house. I don't even know if the microphone on here is working. I apologize if it wasn't.
All right. Let's get us back to the group
All right.
DM.
Let's get us back to the group DM. Maximize that. There we go. All right.
Boom. So,
I'm just going to close this. Sorry.
So welcome, folks.
Check.
You notice a few changes tonight. Our co-host Torin is in another Discord right now because he has created a game, and it's an artist collective where they're all demonstrating and playing games that they've created as part of a challenge to themselves and to each other. He might be joining us later if he can.
Torin cares more about art than sitting here while smart people talk.
I think there's balance for both.
Which is
I'll defend Torin, although I'm not his friend.
Not on Sunday night.
That's exactly it. I mean, how could he have possibly known that he would have plans? Right?
There could be ways of actually tracking that, but that requires technology.
We're doing it 7 every Sunday, and that's a big thing to everybody watching. 7 o'clock every Sunday. We're here. I think we're going to try. I'll do the intro. I think we're going to try some Jackbox games after this as well. For those of you who don't know that. Anyway, greetings, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. Welcome to Viral Transmissions. This is our 7th episode. I want to make sure that I got that right. 7 episodes. Next week will be 2 straight months of it. And I want to say a big thanks to Kiki Planet for the subscription they just dropped. It helps because things are tight right now, so send in subscriptions. Also, a big thank you to the BC Humanist Association, who are now a sponsor of Viral Transmissions. So you can head out to BC Humanist... Oh, God. .ca, there it is, bchumanist.ca to check them out. They are a fantastic secular organization here in British Columbia, Canada. They do some great work. They don't just talk, they actually get stuff done, and are compassionate and ethical while also being secular. Love them. Hey, there's Ian Bushfield, who is the executive director of the BC Humanists right there. Give him a big hello. And a big thank you for supporting Viral Transmissions. Tonight we have Dr. Nienke van Houten again, and Rob has a special video that I'm going to start downloading now, and I will let him take over while I get the video ready for the next segment. Take it away, Rob.
Week 7, and you might be wondering, why are we having a guest back so soon? Well, there's big news this past week in the vaccine development front. which somehow I don't think got nearly enough airplay in the public press. So I wouldn't exactly call this a scoop. I would merely say we're bringing attention to something that is potentially really important that, I don't know, didn't make it over to this side of the Atlantic. So we brought our vaccine consultant and reporter on the case to check this out, see if it passed the smell test. And with those findings, Dr. Van Houten, it's over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Rob. Yeah, and overall, my reading of the situation is that it definitely does pass the smell test. I wanted to give you a little bit of background on what this vaccine story is about and where it's coming from and how it's situated in line with some other studies that are happening as well. And it's kind of interesting. And I'm gonna just backtrack just a little bit. So there's the University of Oxford, and the University of Oxford has the Jenner Institute, as well as a vaccine, the Oxford Vaccine Group. So they have capacity for vaccine development for emerging infectious diseases. I'm not sure how long they've been around, but they've been working on problems like this for a while.
Well,
and
I'm assuming with the name of the Jenner Institute, as long as Jenner?
Yes. So that would be the Jenner who was the first person to document how cowpox could prevent smallpox, and did a challenge trial in a young child. Also an interesting story. So yes, the developer essentially of the smallpox vaccine, who is the first person to set all of vaccine technology off. So just to put it in context, the World Health Organization has a list of diseases of concern that's been around since about 2017. Well, there's been diseases of concern for a while, but this is the updated one that was put out in 2017. So these were diseases for priority vaccine development. And I'll just give you a taste of some of these diseases that are on this list. There's renal viral hemorrhagic fevers, such as Lassa fever, Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever. There's filoviral diseases such as Ebola and Marburg virus, MERS, so Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, which is also caused by a coronavirus, SARS, and some other ones. So these are a lot of scary sounding diseases. At this institute, there's been the development of a vaccine platform for a number of years that have been happening, and it started around anti-malarial vaccines. And this platform is based on something called a chimpanzee adenovirus. So this is essentially taking a virus that infects chimpanzees, and basically it gives them the common cold. It's like it's a chimpanzee cold, and it doesn't replicate in humans, and it can be genetically modified to express antigens from basically any one of this list of priority diseases for vaccine development. So there's been this existing platform that's been undergoing research at this institution for some time. And it's been used to develop a MERS vaccine, so a vaccine against Middle East Respiratory Syndrome that's been fairly extensively tested in animals. So they've done it in transgenic mice. They have tested it in macaque infection models. And when I say the term infection model, what that means is that you can give the animal the disease and see if it progresses. And it's also, this particular platform has also been tested in humans in a phase 1 trial for Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. And those results are fairly recent. So there's been a bunch of work that's been done to this point to get this platform ready. Now there's a professor at the Jenner Institute. And her name is Sarah Gilbert. And I think it's really exciting to see a woman leading this effort. And Sarah Gilbert, she's a vaccinologist. In January, she started hearing about the virus in Wuhan. And this is kind of funny because having been in a research lab, I can just totally see how this plays out. You know, you're kind of looking for funding, you're looking for ways that you can maximize your particular vaccine platform. So maybe show that it has value in other contexts. And so she saw this virus in Wuhan, said, okay, let's design a vaccine and we'll publish a paper to show that a rapid response can be made to this outbreak with our vaccine technology. You know, a little lab project. And then it blew up. And so, so this little, yeah, right.
This is like movies. This is movie science.
Yeah, I know, it's ridiculous. So it's like I was, and I might be inferring a lot from some of the reading that I've done, but you know, there's some pictures of her sitting there, you know, nobly, you know, in a library, and I'm kind of inferring this, like, what the hell happened with my little side project that you work on in a lab. And it could, because I've done those kinds of projects where you're like, okay, well, let's just try this little vaccine antigen and we'll see if it produces some antibodies and we'll write some papers on it and we're done. Next, please.
More coming next year, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So look at us. We did a relevant thing. We can do it fast. So it ramped up very quickly. But because of all of this background work that had already been done with this vaccine platform, especially for another coronavirus, for MERS, that created a situation where this vaccine could be rolled out more quickly, because some of that testing had already been done, some of the platform had already been prepared. And so what's happening with this vaccine platform is that they are already starting phase 1 trials. They've started phase 1 trials in this past week. I just want to see if I just want to check on timeline for you. Yeah. So in March 27th of this year, they recruited about 510 volunteers for age 18 to 55. And then I think in that time, they actually expanded that. So by April 24th, they had 1,110 people ready for human testing for this particular vaccine. And what they're doing is they're splitting it into 2 arms. They're injecting half of the group with the Oxford vaccine. And I'll get into what that is in a little bit more detail in a moment. And then they're comparing that to a meningitis vaccine that's already been approved. And the reason you want to have it compared against another vaccine is because you don't want people knowing what arm they're in. And sometimes there's some side effects with vaccines, like local injection irritation or slight fever that might last a day or so. And so you need to have some level of antigen presentation in the control arm. And so what they're going to do is they're giving
Would that be similar? So sorry, is the goal there then that you want the placebo to be somewhat of an active placebo, but not active in a relevant way, so that basically everybody feels that gross feeling for a day or so?
Right. Yeah. So you don't want people knowing what arm they're in.
And I guess they already kind of know the typical side effects of that, so it doesn't have to be a complete placebo of nothing, and they'll be able to compare that to this other one. Is that true? Like they might say that if both of them get, I don't know, itchy, they might go, well, we know that the meningitis one makes you itchy, so this one does basically the same. Is that how that works? That they're not comparing they're not comparing to a nothing placebo. So they have to take
No.
that into account. Is what
Well, I think the rest of the population is kind of a nothing placebo, but
yeah, okay, that's fair.
but you're not actually incorporating that information into the study per
Right.
se.
Okay.
But this is a way to ensure that people don't know, to kind of blind the trial, I think.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, clinical trial design is not my strong suit. You know, I can talk about
placebo instead of an inert placebo, essentially.
Yeah.
So that you fool everybody involved, the participants and the investigators.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So nobody knows. You'll just get a vial of something with a serial number on it, and it just goes into someone's arm.
Yeah.
Now this is really huge for a phase 1, like 1,100 people. Phase 1s are usually like 10 people.
Yeah.
So can you speak to that?
Yeah. So in typical, I'll just run through the typical how vaccine trials have been done historically. So typically vaccine trials start with preclinical studies where candidates are developed, they're tested in animals, and the immune responses in animals are analyzed. And then once that's been done, then you start seeing first safety testing in people at very small levels. Those are phase 1 trials. Then you start to see phase 2 trials, which do some like dose titrating and look a little bit more in depth at the immune response that it produces. And then you get to phase 3, which is bringing it into really big segments of the population and then looking for efficacy. And what we're seeing with the vaccine trials that are being proposed for SARS-CoV-2 is we're starting to see compression of some of those phases. So with this particular trial, they're going to be looking at both safety and efficacy within this trial, within this small group.
So combined phase 1 and 2.
Yeah, and so we're starting to see merging of these phases, and so I'm sure that a bioethicist would have a lot to say about this, because there's reasons that we've developed these phases for clinical trials over time, but we're kind of in a global crisis. So then compromises start to get made within that process, and in order to fast track any vaccine, those compromises become necessary.
Yeah, it feels like a medical trolley problem. Like, do you pull that switch and potentially, like, what if the vaccine causes cancer in 10% of the people? That's probably not a vaccine we want to use. So that's a thing we should find out before we use it. I'm picking something random. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but that's not a typical vaccine side effect.
Okay,
but,
heart attack. Would that be a thing then? I don't know. But, something very, very bad that makes it not worth using at all, even if it's effective in stopping the SARS-CoV-2.
Well, I might have an example of bad.
Sure.
In a moment.
I certainly don't know anything. So yes, I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, so we can talk about this example of bad, which is kind of interesting, but also potentially terrifying. But let me just finish with some of this information about this trial, because I think people will want to understand where that's going. So they're going. What's going to happen is, so they're just starting off with 10 people, and then they're slowly going to ramp up to these 1,100 people. So people get a diary to track the initial side effects. And then what's going to happen is those people are going to be allowed to circulate within the population. And this is taking place in the UK, in the Thames Valley. And then they're going to compare the number of infections in the vaccinated group versus the number of infections in the control group. So
which is the general population. Oh,
the control group is the meningitis.
Right. Sorry. Yeah.
And so what you need to have in order for this vaccine trial to be successful is to have some degree of wild transmission that's happening within the population. So what that means is, if the UK is very successful at controlling coronavirus infections within that region, that's actually going to impact how long this trial will take, because people are going to. Sorry, what?
Oh, sorry. The good/bad news is that the UK just exceeded Italy.
Yeah. So that's okay.
So it seems like there will be opportunities to encounter the wild virus.
Well, that is good news for this trial. Not for people in the UK, but for the trial, that for the trial to work. That's
right.
That's
So
going to be.
It's a bad thing that's happening anyway. Might as well exploit it.
Use it to the benefit of humanity.
Yeah. But sorry, I didn't mean to derail you there.
No, that's fine. So this wild transmission is really important for data collection. If there's good wild transmission, they could get information about efficacy as early. They're saying optimistically as early as June. But if wild transmission, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because they only need one dose of this vaccine.
It's just head-spinningly fast.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And I could take 6 months if the wild transmission is not is stunted. But so that's kind of what we're looking at, is like 1 month to 6 months.
Okay.
We don't know. We don't know. What we're also seeing is ramping up of potential manufacturing capacity. They're kind of gambling. So the AstraZeneca, which is a huge pharmaceutical corporation in the UK, has actually teamed up with the University of Oxford to have large-scale manufacturing capacity that could potentially produce up to 1 million doses with other vaccine partners globally if this particular vaccine works. So they're investing a lot of money in potential large-scale capacity if it works. If it doesn't work, then they've just invested a lot of money in, well, maybe that infrastructure can be used for another vaccine candidate. But that's the scale that we're seeing happening. Mm-hmm. Now, we'd need about 1 billion doses of the vaccine, it's predicted. So 1 million is a small drop in the bucket, but you might be able to take that to critical areas and start doing some containment of that. So, and there was some monkey data that gives us some hope about the potential for this vaccine.
But wait, there's more.
There's more. But there's also more. There's also
more.
Well, it's.
So tell me about the monkey data.
Okay, monkey data.
How many monkeys lived? How many died?
All of them lived, but there was only 6.
Oh.
But this is the thing is, I could not actually look at the monkey data. So anything that I've heard about the monkey data is simply, it's like hearsay from the news. Like, this is what the PI is telling the news. So they've tested this vaccine at a special lab in Montana. Bio research lab in the mountains.
Sure, why not? As one does.
As seen on Stranger Things.
Yeah. So they gave these. So these were rhesus macaques. They gave them 1 dose of the Oxford vaccine, and then 7 days later, or after 4 weeks, then they challenged them with SARS-CoV-2. And the only information that I can find as of May 1st in Science News, because there isn't even a preprint of this data yet. This is just, here's a news article, is that the vaccinated animals had a much stronger reduction of virus in their lower respiratory tract. And that preliminary results look promising.
Okay. So at the very least, it looks like it will give you a milder version, once you get infected, you will have a milder version of the disease. Is that it?
That's that's how I'm reading it. Is a reduction of virus in the lower respiratory tract to suggest less, which suggests a less severe disease. And but yeah, so that's kind of like just this little tease of information that I don't really have any more about. Like I wanted to see the paper. But there, there's a lot of things that we don't know about this either. So I mean, there's critiques about the animal model that's being used. We don't know if what works in monkeys will also work in humans. We don't know what a vaccine like this will work, how it will work in a highly variable genetic population. We don't know how long immunity will last. Yeah, so there's a lot of questions, but
there's hope.
There's hope. There's some interesting stuff that's coming out. And so, I mean, I feel like I'm talking this up a lot, but I don't want to do that too much. I feel like there should be, this is exciting. This is good. There's still a lot of things that could potentially derail this.
Yeah. It's like a good poker hand. A good poker hand does not mean you've won, but you should be excited when you start the game with a good poker hand. Yeah.
Yes. So this is a strong hand.
Yeah.
This is definitely a strong hand.
Good. That's nice.
But yeah, this is not the only vaccine.
We're talking jacks, queens,
aces.
Not jacks.
Jacks. Yeah. And then COVID-19 goes and shows you the straight flush.
Ew.
Straight flush. Yeah, we talked about the GI symptoms a few weeks ago. So anything else on the Oxford story?
Well, that's kind of where that's where I'm seeing. I think that's about it, really.
Okay.
I mean, I think that's
the first
the
group
status
to
of
go
where
to
things
phase
are
1.
at.
But it sounds like they're going to be the first group to go to phase 2, like rolling phase 1 right into phase 2.
Yeah, I think they're going to have. They're really on track to get some fast data. Now there is another group in China that is developing a vaccine as well that also looks promising, and this is an interesting. They started human trials in April 16th. I don't know how their trials are structured in terms of compressing the phase 1 and phase
prisoners.
2.
Sorry.
I don't know much about the trial population, but they have started human trials. But it's kind of interesting because the vaccine platform that they're using, like I was reading in Science magazine. And just for people out there, Science magazine is one of the premier high-level science magazines out there, like for really cutting-edge research. And it's published by the American Association for the Advancement of Science. So it's definitely embedded within it's an American publication.
Okay.
And what's really interesting about how they're reporting about this Chinese vaccine, which is being produced by this company called Sinovac Biotech, is they're saying that their formulation is old-fashioned. It's old school. So there's kind of like this little bit of like.
Did they inject it into a horse and then draw the antibodies out of a horse? Isn't that how old school works? You go super old school. Wasn't that it? That they injected into a horse, one of the first vaccines?
I think you're thinking of serum, which
maybe.
Yeah, and you make serum by vaccinating something. So yeah, it's not actually that far removed if you look at how those things are produced. I would say this is kind of like 1950s polio vaccine technology.
Okay.
The Salk vaccine, kind of like the Salk vaccine.
Okay.
Which is
would be like enough for me.
Wait.
I said not enough for Saban.
I said horse. Yeah. I probably should have said prisoner. I worry about China's ethicality when, like, especially, I mean, we're talking about how we're pushing ethical boundaries, with the phase one, phase two rollout, and it's important, so it kind of has to happen. I can see a totalitarian government like China going, look, we've got these prisoners here, and this is very important. So let's give them vaccines.
We got them donating organs.
And let's inject them with SARS-CoV-19 and see how the vaccines work. I worry about that. And then I worry about, do we, if that's the first one to market, how do we all feel about using it?
Well, and even beyond that as well, like I was saying with respect to this clinical trial that's happening in the UK, if rich, wealthy countries are containing these diseases well because they have infrastructure, and that's not true for all rich, wealthy countries, but it certainly is for some, then you can't do human challenge studies, or maybe we will. Maybe we'll get to that point where we start just giving people infections, which which is unthinkable in our current vaccine bioethical realm.
Yeah.
But then to test these vaccines, then you take them to places where there's a lot of vulnerable people, and in vulnerable conditions. And so, we're kind of, I mean, we're looking at a situation where that's natural, but that is very high possibility for exploitation.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Valid point. So
we have a question from Ischemiel here. Not sure if any of you know the answer to this, but does the country that eventually discovers a working vaccine get to choose its price? I'm terrified it'll be the US and they'll make it disgustingly pricey. I believe I heard very early on that China said they would release theirs free. That if they got to it first, they would be like, here's how it works. Please everybody make it and give it out.
Yeah, and the Oxford vaccine is it would be licensed. It would be a not-for-profit vaccine. Okay. So this would not be something that somebody profited from. And I don't know about other vaccines, but yeah, cost recovery.
I think you're absolutely allowed to recover your costs when you save the world. That's fine.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. I think everybody's okay with the people who put the work in to get this done getting something. It's the exploitation, I think, is the thing we're worried about.
The thing that's interesting on the vaccine development front is I believe Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation have committed to seed funding. I don't quite know how it all works, but maybe 6 or 7 vaccine factories. So once there's a vaccine, the plan is to be able to get it rolling out at industrial scale as quickly as possible, which is that's really significant because there are some pretty significant bottlenecks in the vaccine process at multiple steps. Because you've got to grow things. You can't just make things.
Yeah. And it's going to depend what kind of vaccine works. Because some vaccines are going to be easier to produce than others. Like, for example, with the Innova, I think it's Moderna vaccine, they're injecting mRNA molecules. Those are pretty straightforward and easy to produce and synthesize. You don't actually need to grow them in a cell. Okay. Once you start growing things in cell lines, that requires it becomes a lot more technical in order to first of all, just propagate those cells, infect those cells, recover virus from those cells, purify them. So it becomes a lot more technologically challenging, I think, than something like a nucleic acid vaccine would be great from a manufacturing perspective compared to something like chimpanzee adenovirus.
For the folks at home, mRNA is messenger RNA, and basically DNA makes RNA, and then RNA gets used to make proteins. So the idea is just inject the messenger RNA, which then is a couple of steps closer to actually just making the proteins of relevance. So then the proteins become the antigens that your immune system learns how to fight.
Okay, so it it injects a thing that makes you create the resistance.
You make the antigens, and then you attack the antigens, and then
Nice.
Yeah, and the adenovirus vaccine kind of works like that too. It's essentially delivering the genetic information to make the SARS-CoV-2 antigen. It's genetically engineered to express that spike protein. But some vaccines will do that on the surface of the actual vaccine. This one has the virus deliver that to cells, and then those cells make the antigen, and then the immune response responds hopefully accordingly. I just want to step back and go back to this Sinovac biotech vaccine, because it's got some support underneath it as well, because they have also had experience in doing phase 1 human trials for a very similar version of a vaccine that was a SARS inactivated vaccine. So they've done some testing, and they also have they have monkey data as well. So it's monkey
I'm loving
data.
that term now, monkey data.
Yeah.
Although it's probably sad. Anyway, sorry.
It is sad.
Yeah.
But yeah, so but they have monkey data that is also promising, especially in the high dose groups. But it's kind of interesting because this vaccine, the Sinovac vaccine versus the Oxford vaccine, they use very different vaccine technology, and I'm really, really curious to see what those what kind of immune responses are going to be stimulated in humans by those two vaccines, and it'll be curious to compare them. One concern that has emerged from animal work in terms of vaccination for SARS and MERS. So this is original SARS and Middle East Respiratory System, which are both coronaviruses. So these are viruses that they're closely related to SARS-CoV-2, which causes the disease COVID-19. So what's been observed with those vaccines is that if they skew the immune response in the wrong direction and they don't stimulate it strongly enough, that there can actually be a risk for what is called disease enhancement if those animals get infected later on. So
okay, so what do you mean by so there's a risk that it could make you more susceptible?
It enhances it in a few people or in a few animals. It enhances the presence of those antibodies that are at low levels and maybe weakly binding, actually enhances the infection when they get challenged with it.
Okay.
And this is so this is so this sometimes happens if the immune system is not pushed in the right direction. And we don't know if this is the case with humans. We don't know if that's a concern for a human vaccine, but there are examples of experimental vaccines that have been made for humans that have had this kind of effect. And so we have to be really, really cautious in terms of what kind of immune responses we're producing.
Right. And this is what the testing is for, is to make sure that, okay. Wow. Okay. So some hope, but some buts added onto
Yeah,
there.
yeah. I think that the caveat and the like, I'm excited.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm really curious to see what this is going to look like in the next little while. Um, but
But
there's 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 a lot of things. There's
yeah,
a lot of things that could go wrong on the
I,
river.
again, I to help my non-expert brain, I try to bring it into game terms, and we've got a couple of rolls to make, people, and sometimes
Mhm.
you roll a bunch of ones in a row, and that just happens no matter how many pluses you think you've got on the roll, and all of those failed rolls mean more time that this has to keep getting studied, and other possibilities have to come to the fore. Wow,
Yeah,
thanks so much. Was there anything else, or are we going to move on to Rob's video? I could do Rob's video now.
yeah. Why don't we play Rob's video? Always talk
Okay.
about more stuff after if you want to.
Let's.
So
So
I'm
let me
just
just.
sitting in my home office, as I do, in this very chair, and I start hearing this noise outside. And I definitely hear people chanting out in the street, which is unusual. I'm used to hearing the cheer happening at 7 o'clock, but I'm not used to hearing what sounds like organized sort of protesting. So I go out into the balcony and I see a parade marching up Quebec Street, and grab my phone and capture this video from my balcony.
Let's get that up there and turn the names off. And here we go. Whoops. So you can talk over this, Rob.
Okay. So as far as I was able to determine, it seemed to be a group of protesters somewhere under 100, but they made their way up Quebec Street. Then somebody photographed them later on on Granville, so they had a bit of a march through downtown. And as far as I could tell, it's a group that is protesting the lockdown, and they want the end of the lockdown. But there's no lockdown in BC. The regulations here are that you can't have any groups bigger than 50, and eat you can't dine in at a restaurant, and clubs are closed. So it's not entirely clear what they're on about, right? Because a lot, there definitely have been some restrictions in businesses. Most of those have been voluntarily undertaken by businesses themselves, so as not to put their staff at risk and not to put the public at risk, and also not to incur expenses, because the public, by and large, or a big chunk of the public, is sort of scared of circulating and catching the virus. So there's just not a lot of demand on certain businesses. So there's not much point staying open and incurring expenses when there's no demand.
Mm-hmm.
But here was this parade on Quebec Street saying we have a right to work and we have a right to eat. And I just sort of wanted to throw down pamphlets saying, well, you can just go to the Canada Revenue Agency website and sign up for CURB, and you can get your expenses taken care of. And
Yeah.
you can't be evicted from your home right now, and there's a renter's grant. And
Yeah.
what are you people doing anyway?
Yeah. What
There
is the
isn't a
problem?
lockdown.
And
There's no
also
lockdown. There's a
many rest
virus. There's
many
not a
restaurants
lockdown.
are still open. You can go to a restaurant and order food and then walk out with it, but
Yeah.
they don't have a dining area. They will generally ask you to wait outside if you can while it gets ready, so that nobody's clumped together. It's all sorts of
Yeah.
totally reasonable stuff that allows you to still do what you wanted to do generally. But yeah.
And I see lots of, and if you really, really want to work, I see no shortage of want ads for people in delivery, in transportation, in food preparation,
Agriculture.
agriculture.
Mhm.
There's lots of need for labor right now.
Yeah.
So I really don't know what this group was on about, but it was just fascinating to watch.
Yeah.
Like I think in America, where they're really caught, um, where there isn't a lot of social safety net. There's there was one $1,200 check from the federal government. And so a lot of folks are not getting protection from eviction in a lot of cases. And a lot of folks are being told if you don't go back to work because of coronavirus, that's considered voluntarily quitting and you're not eligible for unemployment benefit. Those folks are genuinely squeezed, and I have a lot of empathy for them.
Mm-hmm.
But these folks marching up Quebec Street, I have no idea what their actual issue is.
Ignorance squared is what I called it. Like they're ignorant about the danger of COVID-19, and they're ignorant about the restrictions that have been put on them. Like, just they just don't seem to care what the reality of it is. They just want to protest that their life isn't exactly the way that they want it, is what it seems like.
I'm a little bored. I'm a little frustrated, but I'm mad at the virus. I'm mad at the pandemic.
Yeah.
I'm not mad at the public health measures that we've taken to try and limit it and control it. Things would be much, much worse without those measures. I assure you.
Oh, yeah.
Look at what...
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, it's trying to convince people that tiny invisible monsters exist. And so a lot of people can't see the tiny invisible monster that's making everyone sick. So they're basically just railing against the system that's trying to control it.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, it's real, right? I mean, after the first pandemic wave through New York City, 1 in 500 New Yorkers is dead. That's an incredible figure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's
and we saw
thousands of people.
There was the Jimmy Kimmel he's doing a hero of the week or hero of the day, and he had a Bronx health worker on and said, how many of your coworkers have caught COVID-19? And his instant response was 60%.
Yeah.
60% of his healthcare coworkers have caught COVID-19. It's brutal.
The unsaid thing is he has lost colleagues.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And for those who didn't know, Katie pointed out CURB is here in Canada. You can apply to get $2,000 a month to help cover your costs. I think BC is offering, is it $500 a month for rental help? I think is what it is. I haven't been able to access that because I'm self-employed, and up until recently, if you were making any money, you couldn't get it. But now I hear that I will be able to, so I'm gonna have to go check out that myself, which is good because damn, it's tight. Yeah. Oh, it's a different story in New Zealand. We've been on quite a strict lockdown for 40 days now, and the debates around restarting the economy, etc., are fairly balanced, but no protests yet. Okay, that's good. New Zealand has declared themselves COVID-19 free, and I've heard a few things about that through some friends in and around the film industry that are very interesting from kind of a getting things done aspect. That because New Zealand is COVID-19 free, which means unless somebody else comes in with it, they don't have to worry about it all that much. That movies and because they have an existing movie production thing going on down there, big movie studios are planning to start production in New Zealand, and they're going to send their crews there, who will then go into quarantine for the 14 days before they're even able to hit the set and start filming. But after that 2 weeks of just sitting around and being in quarantine, they were like, okay, you're in the country, there's no COVID-19, business as usual, make that movie. And so now I don't know which studio did that at first, but one of them said they're doing it, and all of a sudden a whole bunch were like, oh, you're right, we can work around this. How do we do it? And I think that New Zealand is going to get rushed with money for this. And we're going to see a lot of these people saying, we can't lose money by going strict. Look at New Zealand, who went about as strict as you could, just rolling in the movie money,
right?
Because they're finally now the safe place to do it.
This is how it works.
Yeah.
This is how it works.
Yeah.
Right. You do the lockdown, you get through the epidemic, you get to restart your society and economy. Those plucky little Kiwis.
First. Like almost genius when you look at it that way.
Yeah. And so, so Vancouver just got spanked on the filmmaking front by New Zealand.
Yeah. Yeah, as well as we're doing, we certainly can't start production again.
We cannot certify COVID-19 free.
No.
It took our jobs.
My film work friends are weirded out because I don't know how many people know, but when you work on a film set, it is core hours per day. Like 14-hour day as usual, 16 to 18-hour days happen very, very often. And sometimes 5 or even 6 days a week like that. Like they all just nose to the grindstone, work for a couple of months like that, and then they take a month off and go travel. But now they're like just stuck at home. And these people who are used to working, constantly are posting on Facebook going, well, cleaned my house the third time. Now what do I do? Not
You can
used
come
to
to
this.
my house.
Yeah, I know, right? I'll leave my house so it's safe. Please come clean mine up.
Do you pay IATSE scale though?
No, God. I'll make them a website. I don't know.
All right. So, all right. So, now you mentioned before we hopped on the call that there was something about the World Health Organization and there no evidence of immunity, very clumsy statement that they've since withdrawn, but it's still, of course, floating
Yeah,
around the world.
Yeah, thank you for that. I wanted to bring this up because I saw this come across my newsfeed several times with people who were posting it, having some degree of concern about this statement. And just to give just to repeat that statement, because I think it's an important statement because it's so bad and misleading. This was released on April 25th, and the World Health Organization said that there's no evidence yet that recovered patients are immune. And so a lot of people saw that headline and went, oh shit.
Mm-hmm.
And this was also accompanied with some other stories that were coming out of South Korea, and I think in China as well, of people who had supposedly recovered from COVID-19, then being reinfected or testing positive again for the virus. And so there was this conflation of these two observations within people who are talking about this, that's causing a lot of, I think, angst and worry. And I wanted to create a bit of clarity around that. And that clarity is, don't panic, it's fine, is the bottom line. So with respect to the World Health Organization statement, that statement was basically referring to antibody tests. And so what they're saying is that if you get a test that shows that you have antibodies in your blood, it indicates that you've been exposed to SARS-CoV-2, but it's not an indication of immunity. And basically, that's just because we don't know what the measure of immunity is for this particular disease. It could very well be that antibodies in your blood are good measure, but we just don't know that yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they're saying that there's no evidence, basically they're saying that we don't know the scientific measures for what immunity is. They're not saying that we don't have immunity.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's clearly immunity happening, or else we'd have rampant numbers of reinfected cases.
Right.
And with
recover.
respect, yeah, exactly.
It'd be like HIV. You would just get worse and worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, well, even HIV kind of has, some kind of,
That's true. There's the early spike, and then the grumbling phase, and then the slow climb.
And then there's like latency for a couple of years, but yeah. But there was also some news with respect to these supposedly reinfected cases, and that was that the tests that these were false positive results. And so the tests were picking up remnants of dead virus. So they're not actually producing new virus anymore. And that's because the tissue that the virus infects has a half-life of like 3 months. So there's going to be some cellular detritus hanging around. And the tests don't indicate that they just show that there's nucleic acid present. They don't tell you if it's live virus versus dead virus. And so it's thought that that these are false positives and these are not people becoming reinfected. So I wanted to let people know that immunity is probably definitely happening. We're not seeing reinfections as these reports are happening. And so that creates a very strong support for the possibility of a vaccine. And don't panic about those data.
An interesting paradox of medical testing is illuminated there. Tests that are extremely sensitive tend to be very, very non-specific. So there's always this trade-off, right? So just imagine it's World War II and you're a radar operator, and there are all sorts of officers and politicians who want to know why some radar operators are really good at detecting Nazi bomber fleets coming in early, and there are some that only detect them very late. And what they found out basically is where the operator is pitching that radar. If you pitch it really low, you see the bomber fleets taking off in Germany, but you also see the tops of trees swaying in the wind. You see commercial traffic taking off. So you're calling out all sorts of bogeys or enemy contact, but not all of them end up being true. And there are other radar operators who didn't like all that noise and would pitch their radars higher. So they wouldn't have nearly as much warning time, but their contacts ended up proving highly reliable. And that trade-off is known as specificity versus sensitivity. And the low pitch is a very sensitive test, but it's not very specific. The high-pitched radar is very specific, but not very sensitive. And that led to the receiver operator characteristics curve, which turns out to map very nicely onto medical testing. So medical tests, ideally you want a test that's sensitive and specific, but you almost always end up trading off one for the other. If you want a highly specific test, you're going to end up with missing a whole lot of true cases. There can be a lot of false negatives.
Yeah, so it's really important to understand what you're asking that test to do and what you're looking for. So it's like when you're
exactly.
Like if you know that test is measuring it's measuring nucleic acid. Is the nucleic acid there? That might indicate that there is live virus, but it could also be dead virus. And I think we also saw that with some of the data that was coming out early on with like these cruise ship tests, and they're like, they detected virus so many days after everyone was gone. And it's like, well, they detected that virus had been there at one point. It's not necessarily still infectious. These envelope viruses, they will degrade over time.
Won't make you sick, but DNA, RNA are fairly long-lived hardy molecules. They'll stick on surfaces for a good long time.
It's like blood on a crime scene, right?
It's how we made Jurassic Park. We had all that old dinosaur DNA that just survived. So, or the flip side, so that's an extremely sensitive test. The flip side of a test that has really, on the specificity side, are these serology antibody tests with really low specificity. And for example, a test that has 90% specificity, that's pretty good, right? You give it to 100 people who do not have the disease, and it will correctly identify 90% of them as not having the disease, but it will incorrectly identify 10 as having the disease, and those are your 10 false positives. Just like a sensitive test detects disease if it's there. If it has 90% sensitivity, it'll find the disease in 90 out of 100 people, and there'll be 10 false negatives. Well, if you're going to find these 100 people in a sample of 1,000, your sensitivity is still only going to find 9 out of the 100. You can't find cases that aren't there. But if it has low specificity of 90%, now it's going to find that in your 900 cases that don't have the disease, it'll find 810, like 90%, don't have it, but it's going to incorrectly label 90 as having it. So if you have a test with 90% specificity and 90% sensitivity, you're going to find 90 of the 100 who do have it, and then you're going to find 90 of the 900 that don't have it. And so you're going to have twice the positive rate that you're expecting. And the value of that test, if it comes back positive in that population, you get that test back in the mail and it's positive, you're like, wow, but that actually only means there's a 50% chance that you have the disease. It's still a coin flip whether you're actually sick or not. And this is the problem with using low specificity tests for mass screening. Because if we now go looking for those 100 people in a population of 10,000, well, now there are 1,000 false positives and 90 true positives. And so now the positive predictive value of that is 10%. So even if the test is positive, you almost certainly don't have the disease. And this is part of the problem with some of these early serology studies, like the Santa Clara study or the New York City study, showing all kinds of positives. And this disease is everywhere, and everybody has antibodies, and we have 85 times the rate that we. The vast majority of those are false positives. These are studies using tests that are insufficiently specific. Yeah. Unfortunately, it would be wonderful. It'd be wonderful if actually we had herd immunity, and if actually we 30, 40, 50 times the number of asymptomatic carriers or positives who developed immunity, never had a, but it's just not the case, and we just have to wait.
It would also be wonderful to be able to use these kinds of tests to do that, to do the immunity passport concept. But we don't have the ability. It ties back. So there's like the population prevalence, but then there's also what does it mean for the individual, and how does that connect to what the actual correlates of protection are for this particular disease? So there's a couple of words I've used there. One is immunity passport. This is the idea that if you have antibodies in your blood against the virus, that you are then immune and then can just go around on your daily basis and do all the things without having to, pretend COVID exists, which is a wonderful idea, but we don't understand the testing for that yet, for some of the reasons that Rob was describing as well. And then correlates of protection refers to like what are the actual immunological metrics that we need to be able to measure to understand whether an individual is immune or not. So these serological tests, they have both population and individual potential implications.
Now, Roche just announced a test today that they claim has 100% sensitivity and 99.8% specificity. That would, if those numbers are true, that would be suitable for mass use.
That would be interesting.
That would only have a false positive rate of 2 in 1,000, which is perfectly acceptable.
And do you know, have they addressed the cross-reactivity with other coronavirus strains that are circulating within the population?
Wall Street Journal article did not say.
All right, that's my first question. I'm like, how are they dealing with the potential cross-reactivity issue?
Yeah, so this is the other thing that folks need to understand.
Another term that I should explain. When I'm talking about cross-reactivity, that means if you have antibodies to, coronavirus that causes some kind of like cold in people, there's a few of those that just, they're circulating in the population. It could be that some of those antibodies recognize similar molecular structures on the surface of SARS-CoV-2. So that means you might get a false positive because you've been infected with this, cold coronavirus, and now you're going, oh well, I had SARS-CoV-2, but you didn't. It's just that some of your antibodies are kind of cross-reacting with that virus.
Yeah, and if you're an adult, you've had a coronavirus. You've just had the one that causes a cold, because those are sweeping through. They sweep around the globe once a year, and we just don't bother with them because they just give you a runny nose and a bit of a sore throat for a few.
Huh.
Not son of coronavirus, though. That one wants the whole state. So, comment here. I've heard the other part wasn't reinfection, but small stops in the middle. This is from a ski mule from New York. I got COVID, and I'm still working, but I had a week of feeling better where I thought it was over, but then I had a resurgence of symptoms. My primary care provider said she sees that often in patients. Yeah, so it's this really bumpy clinical course out of the disease is another issue as well. So it might not be reinfection. It might just be you go through a relatively latent period, and then the disease just reactivates, and you're back in with the fever and the feeling terrible. Glad to hear you're coming through it, though.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to see how viremia in particular tissues relates to that clinical course of infection. Like if it moves around or if it goes up and goes down. Just I don't know. Maybe it spreads to different tissues. And
yeah,
and then you get that bump. I don't know. I'm wildly speculating at this point.
Well,
I just want to know.
Tune in next Sunday.
I want to know.
We're gonna have an infectious disease specialist to come on and talk about the clinical manifestations of COVID-19. So that may be of interest. Yeah.
Cool.
Did Torin join us? I see his avatar there.
He did. He posted a
Hello.
link in the chat. Oh, there we go. There's his voice.
Good morning, Hal.
Hi.
I wasn't sure Torin was coming, so I have a good news story as well.
Did you guys talk about how Lego was making face masks?
No.
We didn't talk about it.
Yeah, this is from earlier in April, but they have converted 6 of their molding machines at its billioned factory in Denmark to solely produce visors. And while Lego is only producing 13,500 visors a day at this point, the company says it can, if needed, ramp that up to 58,000 a day.
Okay.
I know Bauer in Montreal.
They'll just click onto the top of your head where you have that little circle.
I hope they have like a little coronavirus figurine that you can just glue on, maybe some other accessories that you could just attach to your mask for, personal bling.
The doctor has that printed on stethoscope on the front of the body part, as I recall. That's a good look.
The white torso.
Yeah, that's right.
With the graphical stethoscope. Will they be made of sharp plastic? One hopes not. Don't step on Lego face masks. Boom. Had to be said. All right. Question from Snowberry 000. COVID toes has been a thing in younger people. I'm very interested in how children might transmit it to adults. I'm a teacher, so this is relevant. COVID toes specifically wouldn't be necessarily transferred to adults, but COVID toes is thought to be because the virus seems to affect the way that our blood coagulates. So it seems to increase coagulation of blood, and the injuries in the toes are thought to be related to small emboli or blockages of small blood vessels, capillary, giving injuries that are very similar to what you might expect to see after frost. This is also thought to relate to the first identified in New York, the appearance of strokes in young adults recovering from COVID-19 at home, otherwise not doing that badly. I mean, it's pretty nasty. A mild case of COVID-19 is like no ride you've ever been on, according to just about everybody who's been on that ride. Nobody seems to want to do it twice. And so there'll be folks at home, mildly short of breath, fever, and boom. And one case series out of New York, reported by a neurosurgeon who runs an acute stroke, found 7 times the rate of acute stroke in 30 to 49-year-olds that they normally see. So they normally see 1 every 2 weeks. And this is a central stroke referral hospital across a major metropolitan area. So it's not surprising that in a city of 9 to 10 million, and who knows, how much further out they're recovering, that you're going to see 1 young adult having a stroke every day. But their numbers went up to about a stroke a day, which was not something that anybody had been expecting. And it seems to be that reasons that I hope we can talk to next week with Dr. Greg Rose, that there's some impact on the way blood coagulates. So anywhere that you have blood, you can have thrombi and embolic events. So, little chunks of thickened, hardened blood that block arteries or small vessels that can create sort of stroke-like phenomena. So COVID toes are sort of like little mini strokes in your toes. I guess it's better there than in your brain. Certainly, we think. Go ahead.
and it's affecting children because I guess the veins and arteries in their toes are smaller than an adult's would be, and so that's a greater effect. Is that kind of what's going on there?
That could be part of it as well. Yeah, or the fact that that the children aren't just little adults, right? They're still in development. And so the way that they clot is going to be different, and the way the relative ratios of clotting factors and things like that's all different. But that very quickly takes us to the edge of the thing. So that's another
Some
question
little
that we
adults
can
are
ask.
children, though.
So, Rob, I have a question.
Yeah.
And you may or may not be able to answer it. With respect to the increased clotting, in knowing that, does that create a pathway for potential treatment and prevention of that particular aspect of the disease?
Well, we had a pharmacist on last week who was talking about the use of anticoagulant agents, which are sometimes used in hospitals anyway for patients who are bedbound.
Right.
They're injected typically with heparin to prevent the formation of thrombosis, particularly deep venous thromboses in the leg, which can then dislodge, go up to the lung, and create a pulmonary. And patients who are bedbound are at particularly high risk for this. And if somebody has a coagulopathy or a disease affecting coagulation, then the thought is, well, what if we prophylactically or preventatively give low molecular weight heparin to individuals who are in hospital with COVID-19? Sounds great, except one of the side effects or risks of heparinizing somebody is stroke. Not from thrombus, but from blood now becoming too thin, and the propensity, therefore, if there's a microburst in a vessel, then that won't clot, and then you have a stroke caused by blood escaping from a vessel and generating pressure in the brain that way, instead of a clot which blocks an artery and then starves that tissue. It ends up leading to sort of the same effect.
Right.
Can't win.
That
Medicine's
sounds
hard.
great.
It's not easy. Yeah.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Damned if you do.
So my good news, we can end with Torrens because that way we can end with penguins walking around. But this is actually aquatic related. The Florida Aquarium just made a breakthrough that will help save the third largest coral reef in the world. There's no details on what the breakthrough, like what the details of the breakthrough is, how they did this. But for the first time in world history, the aquarium in Tampa, Florida has successfully reproduced rigid cactus coral in human care. So these are coral that grow in the Western Atlantic, around Florida, and also down in the Caribbean. And they are getting really hit hard by bleaching. And there's also in the coral a disease going around that's killing a whole bunch of them as well. And the ones in the wild are very, very endangered. And scientists have now figured out how to breed those, basically, if you'd like to call it, in captivity, so that they can keep a disease-free population that they can grow as large as they need to, so that once the disease is gone, they can reintroduce it to the wild and that coral can be back there. There's a few videos of it working. It's kind of interesting how this coral works. It actually has the largest coral babies. It's a type of coral where the eggs don't go anywhere, but the sperm gets ejected, and that then impregnates one of the eggs, or whatever the right word is. And then when it grows to the right size, the parent coral spits it out, and it swims around as this little baby coral until it finds a place to grow on the rest of the reef. And it's pretty cool. It's the kind of they're finger-like coral, so they're the ones that look kind of, like they're all branching upwards like that. And I'll put the link in the chat so people can go read the article if they'd like. So good news for coral out of Florida.
Did you guys talk about how the number of sexually transmitted disease cases in New York has plummeted 80%?
No. But that has such a sad side story to it, which is nobody's getting laid.
That's right.
And my response is, I know.
I was really curious to see what the what STI rates would be like as a result of this time. That's interesting.
Car incident fatalities are down 50% in California. I hear almost nobody's driving.
Yeah, this article on the New York Post says that some patients have elected to stop taking HIV preventative treatment known as PrEP because they knew they would not be sexually active.
Yeah.
And it
Why
also
bother with
says
the side effects?
health officials said the drop could also be due to New Yorkers delaying routine STD and HIV testing since the DOH has closed all but one of its 8 sexual health clinics and moves to telemedicine. So there's that as well.
Yeah,
but it also says, for those worried about contracting the coronavirus by getting frisky, a recently published study found that COVID-19 does not appear to be sexually transmitted.
So
which I'm trying to figure out how that works.
So, sorry, baby, I can't kiss you. like
if you protect everything from here up, then you won't get COVID. Doesn't seem like a complete experience, but different people.
Yeah,
different
I guess it says it's not transmitted through semen, and that's the extent of the study. Maybe.
I guess, yeah, but
so all of your sex is just semen.
So close-minded heterosexual sex, where you don't actually have much fun. Got it. Sorry, you broke up there, Rob. We lost that.
Oh, sorry. I said, yeah, but not missionary.
Yeah, face to face. Well, unless you're both wearing GIMP masks, I guess.
Yeah, you're in separate rooms through the glory hole.
You wear those. There you go, glory hole. But it'd have to be glory hole non-oral, I suppose.
Yes,
because mucous membranes, Rob, genital area. Does it have to go to the
membrane? I don't know. I wonder if oral to genital transmission might not be a thing. I would be more concerned about oral to oral transmission. I'm like I said, I'm guessing. There's a lot of information coming out about where the receptors for these viruses are being expressed. So, and it could be present on it's present on a lot of epithelial tissues. So maybe epithelial tissues in your urogenital tract.
Yeah.
If they have ACE2 receptors.
Yeah.
It also said the study was on a small sample size. Maybe it's just the 2 scientists.
That's right. Look, we bones. It was fine.
The study.
And having the receptors not necessarily enough to produce a receptive or a productive infection. You can have cells that are expressing a receptor that still might not actually produce virus.
We need more information that would make people uncomfortable to talk about, I think. Not me, though. I'll talk about it.
All your questions about the clinical.
We'll talk about it during the Jackbox games. The appropriately named for our sexual experience these days, Jackbox games. Just drink that slowly while that settles in.
I think I've said everything I have to say for this week.
I think we're done.
Very good.
Torrens.
So I couldn't make the whole thing. I was doing a thing.
Torrens' interjections were late but profound.
Yep.
Do you have more to add?
Me?
If you do, it's hard to imagine what that would be. Oh no!
I think this is a good closing point for me. I don't want to top that.
Yes, I came and shut it down.
Thanks.
I will be throwing once the stream stops, I will be throwing a fresh Discord server invite. You have to be on the Discord server to play Jackbox games with us. You can watch over the same Twitch stream, which I will restart when we start the game. For anybody wondering about that.
In about 10.
About 10 minutes. We'll start at 8:30, but I'll jump into the Discord channel pretty much right away, so you can jump in there early if you'd like. First come, first serve. 8 people per game about. Thanks so much, Dr. Van Houten, for coming on again and sharing with us your expert information that you had. That was so great. Again, thank you to Rob and thank you to Torren for coming in with the good stuff at the end. And we'll see you all next week on Viral Transmissions. That's we're at viraltransmissions.com. We're on all the social media. We have the YouTube channel now. I'm backed up on the podcast, but I will try to get several of the episodes out soon so you can listen to the audio. And please remember to spread the word, not the virus. And thank you so much, everybody.